Where we are is not where we should be, based on the promises that were given to us, based on what we were told about the safety guidelines that would be followed for us, and quite frankly for our students.
That was Megan Joninas. She's a New York City music teacher who was protesting in-person learning over coronavirus concerns. She, like many teachers across the nation, are worried the job shortage in education is creating more challenges amid the pandemic. The Economic Policy Institute reports public education is down 500,000 jobs compared to the same time last year. Half of those jobs are teachers. The rest include counselors, custodial staff, and so on. Joining us now to talk more about this is President of the American Federation of Teachers, Randi Weingarten. Randi, good to have you with us today. Tell us, first of all, how is this remote learning working? Are you seeing teachers able to actually reach their students? Obviously, given the pandemic, it is a difficult time for students, families, and as well as educators. What's your overall assessment of how, as a nation, we're doing when it comes to educating our kids during a pandemic?
So, this is, and I don't normally do this, but basically every teacher that I talk to is like this. And it doesn't matter whether they're in remote learning or they're in in-person learning, or frankly, even the kind of bucolic private schools that have lots of space. We're in the middle of a pandemic where the virus has not been curbed. It's actually spiking again. So you start with people being really scared. Are we going to be safe? Are we spreading the virus? Are we making sure our kids are safe, our families are safe? So there is this kind of level of agitation and tension, even when people are wearing their masks, even when we have the kind of physical distancing and ventilation and cleaning that we need to have. That's number one. Number two, you have all the kind of deniers like Governor DeSantis or others who pretend that there's not a problem, and then you have a problem like a White House super spreading event. So that is creating a lot more agita. And then number three, the actual conditions of teaching and learning, whether they're in school, hybrid, or remote, are not great. We know that remote is a poor substitute for in school. But we also know that in school, you need to actually have the social distancing, the masks, and what's happening right now is because of the lack of resources, teachers are doing too many jobs at the same time. So, for example, there are too many teachers, none of them should be doing this, who are teaching to a screen like I'm talking to you, and also teaching in person. That is completely ridiculous. That does not work. You cannot create engagement. Why are they doing that? Because of the lack of resources and the lack of teachers. And then the budget cuts are creating more of that extremity. The same thing in terms of the lack of nurses, the same thing in terms of the lack of guidance counselors, and all of this, and all the social emotional issues that we have that we need to deal with. And then you talk about the 16 million kids who still don't have the adequate equipment, because hybrid requires, whether you're in school or whether you're remote, you need to have the equipment, and the connectivity. And then there's all the other social impacts like the lack of food. So it is a mess. There's no good choices right now, but teachers who would much rather be back in school have a right to be safe, as do parents, as do kids, and they also have, and they have been fighting to make sure those safeguards are there. Let me say one more thing, which is, if we had a functioning CDC, if we had a functioning federal government that you could trust, then you could actually have, these are the safeguards that are needed to be back in school physically. But what happens right now is no one trusts Betsy DeVos, no one trusts the CDC, and no one trusts President Trump. And so it's a mess from the resource side, from the lack of guidance, and from and from the lack of strong, consistent messages that we're getting all throughout the country.
So, Randy, you heard me in my intro talk about how we have seen a lot of jobs go away in the education sector. Tell us a little bit about who are not coming back into the classroom. Is there a particular profile of people that are being most affected among your members, or even extending beyond your members to custodial staff, nurses, et cetera? And what are some of the lasting ramifications?
So thank you for the question. And we are in a bus going very safely, but we're going west to east, north to south. And so sorry for being in my t-shirt and being on the bus, but we're trying to get the vote out. So what's happened now is, initially you didn't see a lot of layoffs because there was a hope that the Congress would actually come through and the president would come through. The House of Representatives have done its job, and whether you're a Democrat or Republican, the fact that Nancy Pelosi was able to get a bill passed in May that focused on extending unemployment and getting the state and local funding as well as schools separate funding was very important. Now that school systems have not seen that money and states have not seen that money, you're starting to see the layoffs starting in the summer and the beginning of this school year. So the first people that we saw going are people who actually work paycheck to paycheck, are people who are invisible but the very important heroes and heroines for our special ed our kids with special needs. They're custodians, they're paraprofessionals, they're the food service workers. They have been kind of essential workers keeping things together. That's the first group. Now we're starting to see the lack of hiring and the loss of jobs for all these people who have actually retired. So you're seeing in Providence, for example, even on virtual education, classes with 50 to 60 people. Now, just even think about it. If you can't see one screen of classes, if you're on a Zoom, and then the most people you can have on a Zoom is 24 or 30, and you have to go back to back, you're not going to have the engagement that you need, and kids are not going to be seen. So even in terms of virtual, this level of class size is absolutely unconscionable. So we're seeing the lack of teachers. We're also seeing that the lack of substitutes. We're also seeing now the lack of guidance counselors and the lack of nurses. So our prediction is without a stimulus, we're going to see 1.4 million layoffs of educators when, frankly, in a pandemic, you need twice the number of educators and you need twice the number of space, or twice the amount of space.
So, Randy, you mentioned you are literally on a bus working to go get out the vote. Obviously, we see the Biden-Harris placard behind you. You're an unapologetic advocate for the Democratic ticket. But when we're talking about educating all kids in America, obviously that is an issue that affects conservative families, liberal families, and every family everywhere on the spectrum. And we do know that state and local governments are facing significant budget shortfalls. In fact, our entire economy is in a mess right now. Do you have any suggestions as to how Democrats and Republicans, even given your own political perspective, can come together on behalf of all kids to make sure that children across this country are getting the education that they need?
Look, and I've been working with a lot of Republicans right now, and in my past life, we have supported Republicans as well as Democrats. I think it's terrible that it's gotten so polarized. And one of the things I like about Joe Biden and Kamala Harris is that they actually have, Biden is unapologetic about being bipartisan and trying to find bipartisan solutions. Now this is, and it sounds a little crazy, but if you were really, really partisan right now, you would look at a Nancy Pelosi and say, why are you still trying to get to stimulus? Isn't it better to not have something right now and to wait until the election? But if you were being partisan, you might say that. But look at what the Democrats in the House of Representatives are doing. They are desperately trying to get us the funding that we need for state and local governments, the funding that people who are unemployed need right now to extend unemployment, because we're starting to see unemployment tick up again. They're looking to get small businesses the funding they need. They're looking to get schools the funding we need so we can actually have these kind of masks or have these kind of masks. They're looking to get us the funding we need for ventilation systems, for additional teachers. So right now, they are trying, and they will keep on trying every single day. I was surprised that President Trump said, told people, no, we're not trying anymore. And you saw what happened in terms of Wall Street. You saw how the stock market hugely declined. Jerome Powell from the Fed said we have to try. We need a stimulus right now, and I am encouraging Democrats to actually fight to get to that stimulus, even if that stimulus will help Donald Trump. We need the funding now for state and local governments. State and local governments start going under, then the rest of the economy goes under. You see what's happening in cities all across the country. They need to keep essential
Randi?
workers on.
Yeah, absolutely. Randy, what do you make of, you mentioned President Trump. Sorry, just one second. Randy, you mentioned President Trump. What do you make of his most recent pledge? Because as you rightfully say, he said it's over, no more negotiations. And then most recently, he said he wants actually to pass a new stimulus that's even more than what the Democrats are advocating for. What do you make of that?
Great. Let's take him at his word. Let's hope that this is the moment he's being honest. I mean, it takes. Right. I hope that he has Mnuchin negotiating with Pelosi this weekend. We really need these funds. People need to know that they're not going to be evicted. Kids need to know that they can get food. People need to know. Small business need to know that they can hang on. Schools need to know that there are resources that are coming so that we don't have to have the craziness that's going on right now, the patchwork piecemeal that's going on right now. We need the funding for schools, for states, for people.
All right. Randi, such a pleasure to have you on the show today. Thank you.
Thank you.